The topic is why engineers hate HR. Once upon a time, companies had personnel departments. These took care of time cards, end-of-year tax forms, and similar paperwork. Interpersonal and performance issues were matters left to management. Then laws became more complex, imposing restrictions on firing people without cause or without just cause, or refusing to hire based on gender or race. As the depth and scope of legal mandates multiplied, personnel departments morphed into the rather more complex field called human resources. HR doesn't get much respect. They're viewed as a cost center that subtracts from the bottom line. To them falls the dirty job of dealing with the druggies and the alcoholics, the employees with anger management issues or substandard personal hygiene, the lazy and the dishonest, and all the other messy human things no one else wants to deal with. It's like janitorial work, except that you're dealing with people rather than dirty floors. And there's a surprising amount of it, mostly conducted behind closed doors. It's the sort of stuff you discuss in hushed whispers rather than stop and admire. But there's more to it than that. After a full engineering career, I can tell you with considerable assurance that by and large, technical staff considers HR to be something to be merely tolerated rather than any positive force for good, and that this is a self-earned reputation. It has almost nothing to do with the fact that HR employees generally lack technical literacy. Yes, they are mostly liberal arts grads in a technology-infused atmosphere, but there are plenty of sharp liberal arts graduates out there doing valuable work. The problem is that your average HR type seems to lack common sense. When I was in business school busily earning an MBA, one of our classes invited a CEO to speak as an example of someone who had turned around a failing company. During the Q&A, I asked an HR-related question. He turned his head, impaled me with his steely gaze, then emphatically declared, "Any man who chooses HR as a career is an idiot." Well, I didn't disagree. If anything, I think he's onto something. The evidence suggests that a lot of self-filtering happens. The more so given the observation that HR as a career path is generally seen as a dead end. If you look at the Fortune 500, you find that the route to the CEO corner office almost never passes through HR. Lateral promotion into HR is more of a way to finish out a career. There's a certain amount of discombobulation inside every HR department. Some people opine that even HR hates HR. At one company, I saw a particular HR employee spending hours sitting in a car in the parking lot, passing the time by reading books. HR eventually fired this one of their own, but it sure seemed to take them a long time to catch on. Things have steadily moved towards less employee privacy. In the post-pandemic era, in response to return-to-office mandates, some employees engage in coffee badging, which means they show up in the morning, swipe their badge to record entry into the building, stay long enough to have a cup of joe and maybe attend a meeting, then leave to continue working from home. A recent news article described the use of mouse jigglers and keyboard activity simulators to counter the automated surveillance. My career includes contact with many HR departments. Over the years, I've encountered just 3 HR employees who solidly earned my respect, and tellingly, they were all recruiters. 2 were the executive recruiters who hired me for my first job out of business school. They were of a different kind, notably more savvy and discerning, and I enjoyed dealing with them. The 3rd was an engineering recruiter for IBM. She told me that her colleagues generally restricted their recruiting efforts to top engineering schools. Simply put, the average recruiter for itty-bitty machine company was risk-averse. They recruited where student quality was more or less guaranteed, which saved them from having to think. There was also a subculture of hiring from certain fraternities. The frat bros looked out for each other. This recruiter had great success recruiting at state universities. Public universities have faculty just as smart as elsewhere, and attract students just as talented as anywhere else, but who prefer local options or can't afford the stratospheric tuition. The talent level may be less filtered, but this recruiter grew up with brothers who tinkered and built things and occasionally popped a circuit breaker or blew things up. From this, she learned to recognize the same creative spark in a candidate's eyes. She found and recruited talent that would otherwise never have been hired by IBM and who would appreciate the job more and work harder. All of her brothers, by the way, chose technical careers, and 3 out of the 4 worked for IBM at various points in time. She assures me that not all HR employees are unremittingly evil. As always, some are drones who are there for the paycheck, but despite whatever structural problems may exist, nevertheless, some go into the field precisely because they care about people. The same recruiter helped a woman who had been abandoned by her husband. He wasn't paying any support, and she desperately needed income. Notwithstanding her lack of a paid work history, she was an excellent cook. The recruiter networked with outside HR departments and found the woman a job with an appliance manufacturer hotline, where she answered questions about cooking and using appliances. This allowed her to work while her children were at school, but just as importantly, her value and success helped restore the self-confidence that had been shattered by her abusive husband. So score 1 for a genuine HR professional. But also note that it was an extracurricular effort well outside of her routine HR duties. Now let's turn to the topic of job postings. For those of you who are still in school, I offer a personal story. When I neared graduation, I joined everyone else in signing up for interviews at the Campus Employment Center. At the time, the economy was in a deep recession, so we were anxious about our job prospects. One afternoon, as I waited for an interview, the door of one of the interview rooms opened, and the student who had just been interviewed left. Then the recruiter came out and spent a few minutes talking shop with another recruiter while they waited for the next interview time slot. "That's exactly the sort of student we like to hire," the one recruiter said to the other. "Too bad we don't have any openings." That's when I realized that recruiters need to look busy even during recessions, and that their presence at the employment center was mostly a way to keep up appearances. To be fair, they were probably scheduled a year in advance, but nevertheless, their presence at that time was gratuitous. Now, you need to know that not all job postings represent actual openings. One recent study pegged the fraction of ghost postings at north of 40%. Interviews might be held even after a candidate has been selected solely to reach the number of interviews required by policy. Sometimes fake interviews are used to pump job-hunting competitor employees for inside information. If you get asked a lot of deep technical questions about how to solve a specific problem rather than a general one, you might be getting milked for free consulting. So be wary of fake job openings and be cagey about your answers. But back to the routine HR machinery. One constant irritation is the drizzle of trivial emails about donation drives and bowling league sign-ups. Then there are the gratingly obvious and heavy-handed mandatory classes on sexual harassment or DEI or whatever the HR fad of the day is. In their universe, these things loom as large as a mountain. For the rest of us, we suffer through the so-called training until we can get back to keeping promises and meeting deadlines, or napping as the case may be. Then there are the routine team buildings and morale-building exercises, perhaps a service project, discount tickets, an annual lunch where the managers dish up the food, and the always classic Christmas turkey handout. These are appreciated in their own way, but these rote performances are as predictable as the arrival of the seasons and are thus viewed with a certain degree of cynicism. But as far as paying attention to actual employee needs, it's hit and miss. I offer the story of the penny postage stamp. Before the Postal Service adopted forever stamps, every time postage rates went up, this would create a temporary scramble for 1-cent stamps. Of course, many employees worked long hours that hindered their ability to schlep over to the post office. Nevertheless, they still needed to mail their credit card and utility payments on time, and often used the company mailroom to send their outgoing mail. You can see where I'm headed here. For a few weeks after each rate hike, mailroom employees would be asked over and over if they could spare a penny stamp, And unsurprisingly, those employees not only said no, but were annoyed by the requests. And super unsurprisingly, HR was too oblivious, clueless, and blind to the opportunity to authorize the stamps and make 100 people happy for a single lousy dollar. Let me be clear. You cannot trust HR. They dance to the tune of upper management in the legal department, and they exist to protect the company and themselves first and foremost, not you. If the company culture is toxic, HR will be too. Any efforts toward nurturing company culture, talent recruiting and retention, and avoiding employee burnout are secondary to adherence to policies. When management decides to can someone, to HR falls the job of bringing down the hatchet legally. They will, to an excellent approximation, never stick their necks out to fight internal battles for you. And they can be sneaky weasels. A colleague told me about his visit to a job fair for a large aerospace company. Upon entering the room, he handed over his resume, but was surprised when he was directed to walk some distance to a table that was empty save for a large gay pride display. In bewilderment, he asked why. Long story short, his visit came to nothing. A backdoor inquiry through a friend inside the company revealed that the table was a ruse to gauge the reaction of candidates. Well, okay, no company should hire bigots, but I know my friend, and he isn't one. It was a crude and dishonest screening mechanism. My advice: when looking for a job, always keep a straight face when dealing with HR and never give them anything to comment on other than how wonderful you are. To emphasize the point, let's switch to the completely unrelated hospitality industry. Think hotels and resorts. One company would invite managerial candidates for a video interview. After the interview concluded, the video crew would banter with the candidate while they made a show of turning off lights and unplugging cables, all while making jokes and disparaging remarks about the company. The interviewee might or might not respond in kind. What the candidate didn't know was that the video recording was still running. It was a charade to uncover what the candidate really thought about the company. Suffice to say, the inevitable lawsuit put a stop to that. So if you can't trust HR, what value do they actually add? On the hiring end, they are primarily a resume collection and screening service to keep hiring managers from being inundated. My personal experience is that a single job posting for an engineering position can easily bring in 100 resumes. The reality is that most will be from marginal candidates who blast out resumes anywhere they can. Of the 100, perhaps 3 or 4 will be worth talking to, and of those you hope that at least one will merit an offer. But consider it from the viewpoint of the hiring manager. They're shielded from the raw incoming volume and see only the few passed through by HR. Given that, they conclude that there must be an engineering shortage. Nope, there is no shortage. There never was. There never will be. One large aerospace campus in Orange County, California, was at the time of my inquiry, which admittedly was some time ago, was receiving on average 1,500 unsolicited resumes per week. They were a resume magnet. However, notwithstanding that cold reality, there most certainly is and always will be an ongoing chronic shortage of qualified engineers. This reflects that many job openings are for narrow, deeply technical specialties. That's what you get when job descriptions are too specific and the company insists that hires must fit 90 to 100% of the requirements and hit the ground running from day one. Now let's finish with a look at the screening process. As we know, HR employees are non-technical. After all, if that's what they were, they'd be doing that for higher pay. But they aren't, which forces them to deal with things they don't understand. I once heard about a highly qualified digital signal processing expert whose application was rejected because he spelled out the words digital signal processing. rather than using the magical abbreviation DSP that HR was scanning for, despite not knowing what the initials meant. Today, HR might use artificial intelligence to speed up the mistake rate. Suffice to say, the purpose of your resume is to make it past HR screening onto the manager's desk. This is why networking with employees at your target company is particularly helpful. Their ability to hand carry your resume offers an end run around the HR gauntlet. You get to deal with peers who have the requisite technical competence to judge your abilities. If you aren't a fit, it still won't work, but at least you're more likely to receive a fair assessment. And so it goes. HR gets hate from technical staff and, hey, let's be honest, from the world in general. They're an expect center, staffed by non-technical persons of limited authority, engaged in thankless tasks within the narrow bounds of rigid policies. And that makes you wonder about those who voluntarily self-select for the career. For those of you who did, may God have mercy on your soul and grant you the least punishment consistent with your choice.